Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at some sample questions and answers for part 1 of the IELTS speaking test. Now you probably already know that in part 1 of the IELTS speaking test, the examiner is going to be asking you some questions about yourself for 4 to 5 minutes. So it doesn't take that long, and it's not the most difficult part of the test. In fact, it's the easiest part of the speaking test. In this part, you don't need to give really long and complex answers, because the questions are going to be quite simple. The topics are not going to be particularly difficult, and the questions aren't going to ask you to do anything complex. The examiner will start by asking you some really simple questions about yourself, maybe about your work or studies. But later on in this part, the examiner might ask you some questions on a slightly more surprising topic, something that is a bit difficult to predict. The reason they're doing this is to test that you're not just memorizing answers. The topic is going to be something that you might not expect to have to talk about. And it's these types of questions we're going to be looking at in this video. The surprise topic that we have is the topic of neighbours, the people who live next door to you. So again, a little bit of a random topic that you might not expect to get when you're walking into the exam room. But this is to surprise you. So you have to think on your feet and come up with an answer quite quickly, and it will be nothing that you've just memorized. So if we have a quick look at these 4 questions that we're going to be looking at. So here we are. The first question is, how well do you know the people who live next door to you? The second question, how often do you see them? The next question, what kinds of problem do people sometimes have with their neighbours? And the last question, how do you think neighbours can help each other? So you can see there, the questions are not really that difficult. They're keeping it quite simple. So this means that when you give your answers, they don't need to be big, long, complex answers. This is a common mistake that some students make. They give answers that are far too long in part 1 of the test. Remember, in this part of the test, you're going to be answering many questions, probably more than 10. And if you give really long answers, maybe you're limiting the amount of questions that you're going to be answering. And therefore, you're limiting the amount of different types of vocabulary and sentence structures that you can show to the examiner. So we're looking at some nice, short and simple answers, but not too short. This is important. I'll tell you what, let's have a look at the first answer to the first question. So the first question was, how well do you know the people who live next door to you? Let's have a look at the answer. I know my neighbours quite well. They're really nice people, and I always stop to talk whenever I see them. So that's it. That's all we really need. I know you might be thinking, well, isn't that too short? I'm going to be showing off in the IELTS speaking test and showing how good my English is. Well, this is really showing that you understand the question and that the question does not require a long answer. If you gave a long answer to this, it might show the examiner you maybe misunderstand the type of question it is. If you notice, the answer is just 2 sentences. This is a good guideline to follow for your answers for the questions in part 1 of the test. 2 sentences is enough. A bit less than that, especially for these surprise questions, might not be quite enough. Let's have a look at these 2 different sentences that I use in my answer to the first question. So, the first sentence, I know my neighbours quite well. Just a short, simple question, but notice here that we're copying vocabulary from the question. The word no is used in my answer and in the question. And the word well is used in the question and the answer. I know my neighbours quite well. We've also given the information. We've answered directly. How well do you know your neighbours? Well, quite well. But we've made sure we've used a nice full sentence that shows we understand the question. Even the pronoun I, well, we've shown that we understand the question is about ourselves. So, that's the first sentence. Nice and clear, nice and direct. But it's probably not quite enough. We do want to show a little bit more, but we don't want to go off topic. So, in the second sentence, we've just explained it a little bit. If you have a look at the second sentence, it begins by saying, they are really nice people. There's a good thing to notice here and something that we need to practice. We've started the sentence with the pronoun they. They is referring to a noun in the previous sentence. Neighbours. They are really nice people. This is a great way of linking sentences, and it's something you should try to do in your answers for part 1. But not only that, I've made this a slightly more complex sentence and added more detail. They're really nice people, and I always stop to talk whenever I see them. Notice as well, both sentences copy the grammar of the question. We're using present simple in the question and present simple tense in the answer. We don't need to overcomplicate things here. So that's the first question. Let's move on to the second question and look at the sample answer. How often do you see them? So in the first sentence here, I see my neighbours at least a few times a week. So again, we're copying words and grammar from the question. I see. Well, see is used in the question. How often do you see them? I see my neighbours at least a few times a week. So that's clearly answering the how often part of the question. At least a few times a week. We've shown that we really understand the question and we can give a clear answer that directly answers that question, bringing focus to our answer. But again, it's not just a one sentence answer. We have 2 sentences here. The second sentence, we usually see each other when we're leaving for work in the morning or coming home in the evening. So this is just explaining the first sentence a bit more. And notice again, it's linking with the previous sentence with a pronoun, the word we, which is referring to me and my neighbours. We usually see each other. So again, we're using keywords, the word see, and we're using the word usually, which is connected with how often. And just then we're giving 2 examples of when we see them, in the morning and in the evening. So it's a nice, clear and concise answer that focuses on the question. We don't need to give any more detail because then we'd be answering more than what the question is asking. And you don't need to do this. Remember, we get to show off our skill of speaking at length in other parts of the test. It's not something we need to show in part 1. Let's move on to the third question now. What kinds of problem do people sometimes have with their neighbours? I think the most common problem is probably noise. It's difficult to live next to people who have a dog that barks at night or who play loud music. So those are the 2 sentences straight away. Let's just have a look at each sentence and how I've done similar things to the previous answers. Again, I'm copying words and grammar from the question. The word problem is in the answer and the word problem is in the question. And I've answered it directly. I think the most common problem is probably noise. So I've given the answer. My answer is noise. But again, I've given that in a full sentence. My second sentence, I'm explaining it more and kind of giving a couple of examples. It's difficult to live next to people who have a dog that barks at night or who play loud music. So those are the two specific examples of that. Again, that's enough. I don't need to do more than that in my answer. Let's look at the final question here and the final answer. How do you think neighbours can help each other? Neighbours can do little things like watching your house if you go on holiday or taking a delivery if something arrives by post when you're not at home. I think these little favours are a good way for neighbours to help each other. So this answer might seem quite long now, but remember, it's still just 2 sentences. And again, we're copying words from the question. The word neighbours is in the answer, and that's in the question too. The word can as well. Neighbours can do little things, like watching your house if you go on holiday or taking a delivery if something arrives by post when you're not at home. So 2 ways of helping each other we've given in that first sentence. Then in the second sentence, we just explain this idea a bit more. I think these little favours are a good way for neighbours to help each other. Well, notice help each other, that phrase is in the question as well as the answer. One thing we've also done here is link the sentences. These little favours. Well, that's referring to the 2 examples in the previous sentence. Favours being things you can do to help someone. So you can see here the answers are just clear and quite concise. But they're directly answering the question and not doing much more than that. We're keeping focus and fluency with our answers. These are the type of answers you need to be giving in part 1 of the IELTS speaking test if you want to get some really nice high scores. And of course, you can show other skills and other abilities in later parts of the test. So I hope these 4 sample questions and answers have been quite useful for you. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos on the speaking part of the IELTS test or the other 3 parts of the test. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.